In this video, we will show how to do the questions in Module 1 of the math portion of the SAT practice test number 7, published by the College Board. You can find questions in this video by finding the practice test online. The test is published by the College Board. You can search College Board and SAT practice test in some internet browser, or go directly to the website that you see on the screen. A link to this website is in the description of the video, and I'll also link a PDF of this practice test in the description of this video. If you go to that website, it'll look like this, and you scroll down until you see the full-length SAT paper practice test bundle 7. In that bundle, you can also find answers and written explanations of the answers. Some of the written explanations may be a little bit different than the ones I show in this video. Once you download the SAT practice test, it will look like this. It starts out with a reading and writing module, and then it goes on through another reading and writing module, and then you get to the math modules at about page 30. So module 1 starts at page 30. The first page of the model has a formula and fact sheet. The second page of the module describes how to format the answers. And then the questions start. So let's go ahead and do these questions. I'll do them on this Word document. So this is Test 7, Module 1. Question number 1. The scatter plot shows the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit and the distance above sea level in feet measured at 6 locations on Mount Jefferson. A line of best fit is also shown. At a distance of 4,000 feet above sea level, what is the temperature in degrees Fahrenheit predicted by the line of best fit? So we go and look at 4,000, where again our x value is distance above sea level. So we look at 4,000. We look at where that line crosses, and we say, well, that point where the line would predict, let me go ahead and draw something, is right here. And it has x value of 4,000 and y value of approximately 35. Therefore, the answer to question 1 is B, 35. So B, 35 is the correct answer. Question 2. Rectangle P has an area of 72 square inches. If a rectangle with an area of 20 square inches is removed from a rectangle P, what is the area in square inches of the resulting rectangle? Well, all we're going to do is take a rectangle with 72 square inches, remove another rectangle of 20 square inches from within that, and that'll give us an object which has 52 square inches. So 70 minus 20 is just 52. So the answer is 52, or D. So D, 52, is the answer to question 2. Question 3. Which value is a solution to the given equation? Now, there's a couple of different ways to solve this. You could plug in numbers and see which ones work, or you could solve that equation. I'm going to go ahead and solve that equation rather than plugging in numbers because plugging in numbers is not that interesting. So if we're going to solve this equation, we'd have to subtract 61 from both sides of that equation. When I subtract 61, I get absolute value of P is equal to 4. And then absolute value means that P could have been a 4 or P could have been a negative 4. So we could have 4, absolute value of 4 is 4, but also the absolute value of negative 4 is 4. So we get two answers, and obviously the only one that is in our options is the answer of positive 4. So B, 4 is the correct answer to question 3. Question 4. Lorenzo purchased a box of cereal and some strawberries at a grocery store. Lorenzo paid $2 for the box of cereal and $1.90 for the pound or per pound for the strawberries. If Lorenzo paid a total of $9.60 for the box of cereal and the strawberries, which of the following equations can be used to find P, the number of pounds of strawberries Lorenzo purchased? Assume no sales tax. So the box of cereal is $2 and he is going to add $1.90 per pound of strawberries. We want to use P as our number of pounds of strawberries. So that's going to give me the total spent. But we also know that the total spent was $9.60, $9.60. So this is the correct equation. 2 plus 1.9 times P is equal to 9.60. The way this is written, you can also flip-flop these terms since addition is commutative. 1.90 times P plus 2 is equal to 960. So either way you write that equation, we're fine. Notice that that equation is option A. Therefore, option A is the correct answer. 190p plus 2 is equal to 9.60. Question 5. The bar graph summarizes the charge in kilowatt hours a battery received each day for 15 days. How many of these 15 days did the battery receive a charge of 0 kilowatt hours? So we look at the 0 for the charge in kilowatt hours, and we just look at how tall this bar is. This bar goes up to 6, which means that the number of days which received 0 charge were 6. And that's it. That's the answer to question number 5 is D. 6 days is the number of days that received 0 charge. Question 6. A line in the xy plane has a slope of 9 and passes through the point 0, -5. The equation y equals px plus r defines the line where p and r are constants. What is the value of p? Now, when I see something like this, I think of slope-intercept form. Slope is 9, so we get y equals mx plus b. That's our normal slope-intercept form. Here it says the slope is 9. And since it goes through the point 0, -5, b is -5. So we'd say 9x minus 5 is the equation of that line. But we're using P and R instead of M and B. It then asks, what is the value of P? Well, P is just the coefficient of X when the line is in slope-intercept form. And so in this case, P is equal to 9. The answer to question 6, therefore, is 9. Question 7. What is an x-coordinate of the x-intercept of the graph y equals 3 times x minus 14 times x plus 5 times x plus 4 in the xy plane? So an x-intercept has y value of 0. So we just set 0 equal to 3 times x minus 14 times x plus 5 times x plus 4. And then we solve that equation. We can divide by 3 on both sides. Dividing 0 by 3 gives me 0. Dividing the right-hand side by 3 just gets rid of the 3. And at this point, I could put each individual piece equal to 0. So set each piece equal to 0. Because of the zero factor property, if you have numbers that multiply by each other to give you 0, then one of those numbers has to be 0. So any of those 3 options would work. And you can see that in the first one, we get x is equal to 14. In the second one, we get x is equal to -5. And in the third one, we get x is equal to -4. Now it turns out it asked me for what is an x-coordinate. You can use any of those as x-coordinates. So if you wanted to use 14, that's fine. If you wanted to use -5, that's fine. And if you wanted to use -4, that's fine as well. So just pick one of those 3 options. And that would be the x-coordinate of the x-intercept. So we have 3 x-intercepts. Just pick one of those x values to be your x-coordinate. Question 8. The graph shown gives the estimated value in dollars of a tablet as a function of the number of months since it was purchased. Which is the best interpretation of the y-intercept of the graph in this context? So the y-intercept is where this graph hits the y-axis right here. That looks about 0 to 25. So essentially, this is number of months after purchase. So at the time of purchase, the value would have been $225. If you read our options, the option that makes the most sense is option A. The estimated value of the tablet was $225 at the time that it was purchased. So that's the best interpretation of the y-intercept of this graph, A. Question 9. Triangles EFG and JKL are congruent where EF and G correspond to J, K, and L respectively. The measure of angle E is 45. The measure of angle F is 20, What is the measure of angle J? So all we have to do, well, there's a couple of different ways I can do it. If you want to draw, that's fine. I'll show you how to draw in just a second, but EFG and JKL are congruent. EFG correspond to JKL respectively. So that means the angle measurement of E and the angle measurement of J are going to be the same. Since I know that E is 45 degrees, this means J is also 45 degrees. And therefore B is the answer. 45 degrees is the measure of angle J. If you wanted to draw a picture, you could. I've already kind of drawn this, although I wasn't very precise. But E and J match up, F and K match up, G and L match up. So if E and J match up, then J also has to be 45 degrees. So that's the answer to question 9. 45 degrees, B, option B is the answer. Congruent means everything is the same. Question 10. The function f is defined by f of x is equal to 1/2 x plus 6. The x plus 6 is in parentheses. What is the value of f of 4? So we take f of 4, we'd plug in 4 into that output. So we're going to get 4 plus 6 in parentheses times 1/2. Add the 4 and the 6 together first, and then multiply by 1/2. You'd get 5. And so the answer to question 10 is D, 5. Question 11. The graph of a system of an absolute value function and a linear function is shown. What is the solution, x comma y, to this system of two equations? A solution to the system is where the two graphs intersect. So I can just look at that and say this graph intersects at negative 3.5, comma, positive 4.5. So negative 3.5, comma, 4.5. Now, doesn't give me that in decimals, doesn't give me my points in decimals, but negative 3.5, comma, 4.5. That's the decimal version. If you do the improper fraction version, it'd be negative 7 over 2 and then 9 over 2. Sorry, negative 7 over 2, comma, 9 over 2. So negative 7 over 2, comma, 9 over 2 is the answer. That's answer C. Negative 7 halves, comma, 9 halves. So C is what we get as our answer. Question 12. One of the two equations in a system of linear equations is given. The system has infinitely many solutions. Which equation could be the second equation in this system? So if we have two linear equations, infinitely many solutions, means that they are the same line. That's the only way we can get infinitely many solutions if I have two linear equations. So I need a line that is equivalent to y equals 6x plus 3. If I want a line that's the same, well, I can add numbers to both sides. I can subtract numbers to both sides. I can divide numbers on both sides, or I can multiply numbers to both sides. And if you look at the options here, the only one where we're doing something to both sides evenly is option D. D, we've multiplied the left-hand side by 2 and also multiplied the right-hand side by 2. Therefore, option D is the correct answer. That equation is equivalent to the one I'm given, and therefore, if that equation was the second linear equation in the system, we would have infinitely many solutions. So D is my answer to question 12. Question 13. If 6 over 7p plus 18 is equal to 54, what is the value of 7p? There's a couple of different ways to solve this one. They're very, very similar. We have 6/7 times p plus 18 is equal to 54. So the first thing I would do is I would subtract 18 from both sides. That way I get 6 over 7p is equal to 36. Now I have some options. If I want to, what I can do is solve for p by dividing both sides by 6/7. If I wanted to divide both sides by 6/7, I could have also multiplied both sides by 7 over 6. Doing that gives me a p of 42 on the right. And then if I'm looking for 7p, all I have to do is take 7 times 42. That is going to give me 294. So 294 is the answer. Again, I went from this step to p equals 42 by multiplying 7 over 6. It turns out if you would have multiplied both sides by a different number, that different number being 49 over 6, it turns out 49 over 6 times 6 over 7 gives me 7p. And if I multiplied the right-hand side by 49 over 6, I would get 294. And so I could have done that in one step if I would have just saw 49 over 6 times 6 over 7p is equal to 7p. But there you go. So you can do that either of those two ways. At this stage, multiply by 7 over 6, and then find the p and then plug it back in. Or just multiply by 49 over 6 and you get 7p equals 294 after you did that. But 294 is the answer to question number 13. Question 14. The solution to the given system of equations is x comma y. What is the value of y? So I need to solve this system of linear equations, and I'm going to do so by using the substitution method. I want you to notice that the second equation can be rewritten as x is equal to negative 7y plus 20. And then if I substitute that expression into my x value for the other equation, in other words, take y equals 9x plus 12, and then substitute in for x, that negative 7y plus 20. So I replace the x with a negative 7y plus 20. This gives us an equation where we can solve for y. Now you could have also substituted the y expression, 9x plus 12, into the y variable in the second equation and found x. But since this question is asking us to find the value of y, I like doing this better. It gives me less steps. This ends up as y is equal to negative 63y plus 180 plus 12. Adding 64y or adding 63y to both sides gives me 64y is equal to 192. And then we can divide both sides by 64. When you do that, you get y equals 3. And this tells you the y value for the solution to the system of equations. We're saying the y value is 3. That's the y value of the point where these two lines cross. So 3 is the final answer to 14. If we were also asked to find the x value, we could have plugged that 3 into this equation and found the x value would have been negative 1. But it doesn't ask us to do that. So question 14, the answer is just 3. Question 15. A circle in the xy plane has the equation x minus 13 squared plus y minus k squared is equal to 64. Which of the following gives the center and the radius? Well, the general form of a circle is going to be x minus h squared plus y minus k squared is equal to the radius squared. That's the general equation of a circle whose center is at hk and whose radius is r. If I match that up to my circle, that means the center would have been 13 comma k, and the radius would have been, well, since 64 is equal to radius squared, the radius would have had to have been 8. So we look at the options. That is describing option A. Option A says the center is at 13 comma k, the radius is at 8. And that's it. So question 15, the correct answer is A. Question 16. The function f is defined by f of x is equal to the absolute value of x minus 4x. What value of a satisfies f of 5 minus f of a is equal to negative 15? This one's kind of weird looking because if you look at f of x, most people would have just rewritten that as absolute value of negative 3x, or in fact, you don't even need the negative there. You could say absolute value of 3x because absolute value of 3x and absolute value of negative 3x are the same. So that's how I'm going to write it. And then we say, well, f of 5 minus f of a is equal to negative 15. F of 5, well, when I plug in 5, 3 times 5 is 15. Absolute value of 15 is 15. Minus absolute value of 3a is equal to a negative 15. Subtracting 15 from both sides gives me negative absolute value of 3a is equal to negative 30. So what value of a satisfies this equation? There's two. So I could put either a positive 10 or a negative 10 in for a and satisfy this equation. Divide both sides by the negative 1, and then you could divide by 3 as well. You would get essentially the absolute value of a is equal to 10, and therefore a could have been 10 or negative 10. The only option that is in my set of values is 10, which is option C. By the way, this is not the only way you could have solved this. You could have just plugged in these numbers and seen what f of those numbers become and see if f of 5 minus those numbers equal negative 15. So there you go. C10 is the correct answer. (17) For the exponential function f, the value of f of 0 is c, where c is a constant. On the following equations that define the function f, which equation shows the value of c as the coefficient or the base? Now this one's weirdly and awkwardly phrased. Basically, what we're looking for is when x is equal to 0, when do we get the coefficient alone or the base alone? Well, the only way we can get that is if we're getting the coefficient alone. And we see that when you plug in 0 into this, you get 22 times 1.5. When you plug in 0 into part C, you get 49.5 times 1.5 to the negative 1. When you plug in 0 into part D, you get 74.25 times 1.5 to the negative 2. The only time you get a coefficient alone is when you plug in 0 into the function described by option B. If I plug in 0 into that function, I get 33 times 1.5 raised to the 0th power, which is just my coefficient of 33. So the only way I get the coefficient alone is in option B. So the function in option B is the only one that works. In every other case, all three of these other cases, I'd get the coefficient multiplied times the base, or multiplied times the base to a power other than 0. So there you go. The answer to question 17 is option B. Question 18. The function f of t equals 40,000 times 2 raised to the t over 790 power gives the number of bacteria in a population t minutes after the initial observation. How much time in minutes does it take for the number of bacteria in the population to double? Doubling means multiplication by 2. And we're asking, essentially, we start with 40,000. When is that 40,000 getting multiplied by 2? So if I take 2 raised to the t over 790, when is that expression equal to 2? Now I'm going to think of that 2 as 2 to the first power, and it's pretty clear that this is going to happen, this is going to double when t over 790 is equal to 1. And that's pretty easy to see that for that to be true, t has to be equal to 790. So 790 is the answer to this question. And obviously 790 is option B. So the answer to question 18 is B, 790. Question 19. The given equation relates the variables n, t, and w, where n, t, and w are all positives. W is bigger than t. Which expression is equivalent to n? Now, we could mess with this and we could try to do some things numerically here, but I think the most straightforward way is just to solve this equation for n. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take 12 over n minus 2 over t is equal to negative 2 over w, and I'm going to solve that equation for n. So the first thing I do is add 2 over t to both sides. When I do that, I get 2 over t minus 2 over w on the right-hand side, and the left-hand side is 12 over n. Now, the way this works, there's no two different fractions. So what I'm going to have to do is I'm going to have to combine these two fractions into one. In the first case, I would multiply times w over w to get a common denominator. In the second case, I would multiply times t over t to get a common denominator. And then I'd add those up. I'd have 12 over n is equal to the fraction, and this is going to be a single fraction that's over w times t or t times w. In the numerator, it's 2w minus 2t. Again, a couple of different ways we can solve, but what I'm going to do is I'm just going to think reciprocals. If these fractions are equal to each other, then the reciprocals of those fractions also have to be equal to each other. The reciprocal of the right-hand side is TW divided by 2W minus 2T. I can factor out a 2 there as well if I like. Now multiplying by 12 on both sides would give me n is equal to a big fraction, 12 TW divided by 2 times W minus T. Well, 12 over 2 is the same thing as 6 over 1. So that 2 can cancel out and be replaced with a 6. And now I have an equation where I've solved for n. N is equal to 6 times TW divided by W minus T. And I go back and look at my answers. The answer that matches up with mine is option D. So D is the correct answer. 6TW divided by the quantity W minus T. So D is the correct answer to question 19. Question 20. During a study, the temperature in degrees Celsius of the air in a chamber was recorded to the nearest integer at certain times. The scatter plot shows the recorded temperature Y in number of degrees Celsius of the air in the chamber X minutes after the start of the study. So X is giving us the time in minutes after the start of the study, and the Y is giving me the temperature. What is the average rate of change per minute recorded of the recorded temperature in the air in the chamber from X equals 5 to X equals 7? Well, this requires me to understand what average rate of change is. It's basically the average change from one point to another. Now, the 2 points we're going to be talking about have X values of 5 and 7. If you look at the point which has X value of 5, we get 514 as that point. The other point is the one that has X value of 7. That is 724. Average rate of change is going to be basically just the slope of the line through those 2 points. And that is 24 minus 14, all divided by 7 minus 5. So we end up with 10 over 2, which is 5. So the average rate of change between those 2 points is 5. And that's it. That's the entire question. 5 is the final answer for question 20. Question 21. In August, a car dealer completed 15 more than 3 times the number of sales the car dealer completed in September. In August and September, the car dealer completed 363 sales. How many sales did the car dealer complete in September? I'll write August sales as A and September sales as S. I'll do the first equation for the first line. In August, the number of car sales is 15 more. That means I'm going to add 15 to something. Then 3 times the number of sales in September. So that's 3 times the number of sales in September. That's 3S plus 15. That's what the equation is for this first line. Then it says in August and September, the car dealer had a total of 363 sales. So I have these 2 linear equations that I need to combine and solve. I can do that by using substitution. In for that A, I'm going to replace that A with a 3S plus 15. By that A, I mean the A in the second equation. So Instead of this a in the second equation, I replace that with the 3s plus 15. So I get 3s plus 15 plus s equals 363. When I combine like terms, that gives me 4 times the number of sales in September plus 15 is equal to 363. Subtracting 15 from both sides. Oh, I haven't done that yet. Gives me 348. And then I can divide both sides by 4. Once I do that, I end up with S equals 87. That means the number of sales in September was 87. If I wanted the number of sales in August, then I'd plug that 87 back into one of these equations and solve for the August sales. I don't need to, because all question 21 asks is how many sales did the car dealer complete in September? So therefore the answer is 87. In September, there were 87 sales. That's the answer to question 21. Question 22. Points Q and R lie on a circle whose center is P. The radius of the circle is 9 inches. Triangle PQR has a perimeter of 31 inches. What is the length in inches of QR? Now I'm going to draw a picture of what's going on, and then I'm just going to dump that in here. So here we go. So there it is. We have my picture. P is in the center, Q and R are on the edge of the triangle. Obviously, none of this is to scale. This is just for visual. But you can see if the radius of this circle is 9 inches, then that means P to Q has a length of 9 inches and P to R has a length of 9 inches. Now we know that the perimeter of the triangle is 31. So basically what we're saying is that if you take the 9 plus another 9 plus the distance from Q to R, we get 31. 9 plus 9 is 18. Subtracting 18 from both sides gives me that the distance from Q to R is equal to 13. So Q to R has distance 13, and that is option B. So option B is the correct answer. 13 is the length from Q to R. I like drawing things when I do get stuck, even if it's a fairly easy problem. Drawing sometimes makes it even easier. Question 23. In a set of 4 consecutive odd integers, where the integers are ordered from least to greatest, the first integer is represented by x. The product of 12 and the fourth odd integer is at most 26 less than the sum of the first and third odd integers. Which inequality represents this situation? Now, there's a lot of words there, so let's break this down into pieces. The first thing I want to do is set up the language for the integers. The first integer is going to be called x. That's what it tells me. That's the smallest. We're dealing with consecutive odd integers. And if we talk about odd integers, we're talking about things like 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, etc., etc. They're all skipping by 2. To go from 1 to 3 is a plus 2. To go from 3 to 5 is another +2, and so on and so forth. So if we're talking about consecutive odd integers and the smallest is x, then the second is going to be x plus 2. Let's put that in parentheses. The third is going to be x plus 2 plus 2, so x plus 4. And the fourth is going to be x plus 2 plus 2 plus 2, which is x plus 6. Now it says the product of 12 and the fourth odd integer. So the product of 12 and the fourth odd integer is going to be 12 times x plus 6. That's the product of 12 and the fourth odd integer. Is at most 26 less than the sum of the first and the third odd integers. Now, we said at most. What's that mean? Well, at most is giving me an inequality. So this is at most, at highest value. The 26 less than the sum of the first and third. So whatever this value is, I'm just calling it V for now. If we say something is at most V, that means we could be less than or equal to that V. Right? This is at most, means less than or equal to whatever value. It can get up to whatever that value is, but it can't go beyond that value. So what's that value going to be? Well, that value is going to be 26 less. That means we're going to be subtracting 26 from something. The sum of the first and third odd integers. Well, the first integer is x. We're summing that with the third. That's x plus 4. And then 26 less than that would be the minus 26. So for question 23, I'm getting this inequality, which is option A. So option A is the answer to question 23. 12 times the quantity x minus 6 is less than or equal to the sum of x plus 4 minus 26. So A is that inequality. Question 24. Question 24 says, the table shows 3 values of x and their corresponding values of y, where s is a constant. What is a linear relationship between x and y? Which of the following equations represents this relationship? Now, I tend to like dealing with the y equals mx plus b form of a line, that is the slope intercept form of a line. So I'm going to start out creating a slope intercept form of the line. By the way, this is not the only way you could do this. You could plug in values and see what's going on, see which ones work. But what I'm going to do is look for the slope intercept form of the line. The slope is going to be the slope between 2 points. I'll use the last 2 points, S15 and negative S21. So slope is the change in y values, that's 15 minus 21, divided by the change in x values, that's s minus negative s. So what we end up with is a slope of -6 over 2s, which I'm going to write as -3 over s. That's the slope of that line. So the line looks like y equals -3 over s plus b. Oh, x. -3 over s times x plus b. Now I'm going to plug in a point. I'm going to plug in the point S15 into this line to get b. So when I do that, I go 15 in for y equals -3 over s. And in for x, I'm going to put the s. It's a little bit of a tongue twister here. So 15 is equal to -3 plus b, and that means b has to be 18. So now I know the equation of that line. The equation of y equals mx plus b is y equals -3 over s times x plus 18. That's the equation of the line I'm looking for. Now, this is in slope-intercept form. These other lines are in what we call standard form. So what I would do is I would multiply both sides by s. When I do that, I get s times y equals -3 times x plus 18s after I multiplied everything by an s. And then add 3x to both sides. 3x plus sy is equal to 18s. And there you go. And that means the answer to this problem 24 is option B. 3x plus sy is equal to 18s. Again, I found the slope-intercept form of the line and then translated it into the line I want. You could have also plugged in values, ordered pairs, and seen which ones give you true statements. And it turns out that if you plug in all of these ordered pairs, the only one you get a true statement for is option B. Plug in S15 alone, and the only one you get a true statement for is problem B. So if you wanted to do the plug in and check your answer, you could have done that as well. Obviously, I did not. Obviously, I found slope-intercept form. Question 25 says, which of the following expressions is equivalent to sine of 24 degrees times cosine of 66 degrees plus cosine of 24 degrees times sine of 66 degrees? Now, if we have access to our calculator, probably the easiest way to do this is to make sure your calculator is in degree mode and just ask it to do that calculation. So let's do that. Now I'm going to have to type this in. If I take sine of, whoops, sorry, sine of 24. Again, make sure your calculator is in degree mode when you do this. Otherwise, if it's in radian mode, you will not get the right answer. Cosine of 24 times sine of 66. That gives you, it turns out, a 1. So when you do your calculation, you get a 1. Now, you can do the calculation for all of these options. Let's do the option A. When I did my calculation for option A, 2 times cosine of 66 times sine of 24 gives you about 0.3309, roughly speaking. That's approximately. When you do option B calculation of 2 cosine of 66 plus 2 cosine of 24, you get about 2.64. So that's not right either. When you do option C, cosine of 66 degrees squared plus cosine of 24 degrees squared, you actually get a 1. So now I can stop. C is the right answer, obviously. But just for the sake of completeness, if you do your calculation with option D, where you take cosine of 66 squared plus sine of 24 squared, you also get that 0.3309 number. So A and D actually are the same values. But C is the correct answer. So C is the correct answer, and that's probably the most straightforward way you could do this. There is also another way that you could do this. If you would like. And the other way, so C is the correct answer. 1 is that. So let me explain the other way. The other way is through using a right triangle logic. So let's draw a right triangle where one angle is 24 degrees and the other angle is 66 degrees. 24 and 66 add up to 90. And so I know that 90, 66, 24 degree right triangle would exist. That's why I said right triangle. I can say right triangle because we're dealing with 24 degrees and 66 degrees. So here's my drawing of that right triangle. We have a right triangle where one angle is 24, another angle is 66, and obviously we have a right angle too, because the angles of a triangle have to add up to 180 degrees. I didn't label that. Now, I labeled the hypotenuse of that right triangle with an H, but I labeled the two legs as X and Y. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to think of the mnemonic SOHCAHTOA. And when I see sine of 24, sine of 24 is the opposite length divided by the hypotenuse. So that would be the y divided by the h. That's the sine of 24. Let me put that into parentheses. Well, what is the cosine of 66? The cosine of 66, well, cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. The adjacent side to the 66 degree angle is the y. So I'm going to also get y over h for the cosine of 66. Plus cosine of 24 is adjacent over hypotenuse. That's x over h. And then lastly, sine of 66. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. That's another x over h. So when we look at sine of 24 times cosine of 66 plus cosine of 24 times sine of 66, don't think of it as 1 here. Think of it as just y over h times another y over h plus x over h times another x over h. And that's the same thing as y over h quantity squared plus x over h quantity squared. Well, what's y over h? Y over h can be written in a bunch of different ways, but if you look up here on these options, cosine of 66 is y over h. So that's the same thing as cosine of 66 degrees squared. What's x over h? Well, x over h, you can think of it as the sine of 66 or the cosine of 24. Cosine of 24 is one of my options. So cosine of 24 quantity squared. So cosine of 66 squared plus cosine of 24 squared, that gives me also option C. So you can think of it as SOHCAHTOA as well if you're nervous about those calculations and plugging things into your calculator right. So thinking of right triangle SOHCAHTOA or just doing the calculations, both give you that C is the correct answer to question 25. Question 26. The cost of renting a carpet cleaner is $52 for the first day and $26 for each additional day. Which of the following gives the cost, C of D, in dollars of renting the carpet cleaner for D days, where D is a positive integer? Now, this one's a little bit tricky because you have to read really carefully. That $52 cost is for the first day. So we want C of 1 to be equal to 52. And then we also want essentially the slope of this function to be 26 because we're going to add 26 every time we increase the number of days. So a lot of times people see that 52 for the first day and they think C of 0 equals 52, but we want C of 1 is equal to 52. That's the trick. So I know that my cost, I'll just write C for now, is going to be equal to 26 times the number of day rental plus some number B. What's that number B have to be? Well, it has to be such that when you plug in 1 to your D, you get out a 52. So you get out $52 for exactly 1 day. And this is forcing us to have a B of 26. Again, that's a little bit tricky linguistically. So the cost for D days is going to be $26 times the number of days plus an additional 26. And that is option A. So option A is the correct answer. And again, the key there is to realize that $52 is a 1 day rental, not a 0 day deposit. So $52 is a 1 day rental. So A is the correct answer. Question 27. The function f is defined by the given equation. For what value of x does f of x reach its minimum? Now you can do this in a couple of different ways. And in fact, let's do those couple of different ways. This is the equation of a parabola. And because I know that every parabola has an axis of symmetry, which is a vertical line that goes through the vertex, and I also know that the vertex is going to be the minimum value of a parabola, I just need to find that axis of symmetry. One way to do this is to find the x-intercepts and go halfway between the x values of the x-intercepts. So that's the way we'll do first. And the reason I say that way first is because finding the x-intercepts mean I just have to plug in 0 for y. And this equation now is already factored. And so I can see that the x-intercepts happen when x is equal to 2 and when x is equal to -15. So if we go halfway between, we get an x value of -15 plus 2 divided by 2. Halfway between means we average them. So add them up and divide by 2. And that is a -13 over 2. Or you can write that as -6.5. So the x value of -6.5 will be where the vertex is at, and that will produce the minimum value for this parabola. And I got that by going halfway between the x-intercepts. I used x-intercepts because they were easy to find if my function is written this way. Now the other option for finding the x value of the vertex is the more direct option where we multiply out the x minus 2 times the x plus 15. We rewrite that. What's going to happen is we'll get x squared minus 2x plus 15x minus 30. And then I'd combine those middle terms. That's going to be a plus 13x. And then you need to know where the vertex is of a parabola in this form. It turns out that the vertex has x value, which is opposite of b over 2a. So if you know that little piece of information, then you can solve this where, by the way, b is the coefficient of x, a is the coefficient of x squared. So the x value is going to be opposite of 13 divided by 2 times 1, because the coefficient of x squared is 1. And again, that's either a negative 13 over 2 or a negative 6.5, whichever way you prefer is perfectly fine. If you want to write it as an improper fraction, write it as negative 13 over 2. If you want to write it as a decimal, write it as negative 6.5. It turns out the test is fine with both of those. Both of those answers will work. So negative 13 over 2 or negative 6.5 is the answer to question 27. And we've seen here 2 ways to get that answer. This concludes Module 1 of the SAT Practice Test number 7. There's a link to the explanation of solutions to the other math module, that's Module 2, of this practice test in the description of this video. There's also a link to the practice test of other math portions of other practice tests for SAT practice tests published by the College Board. Lastly, if you are planning on taking the SAT soon, good luck. I hope this video helps you out.